Good morning, good day, and good evening to everyone, depending on where you are. My name is Svetluša Surová, and I'm the founder and senior researcher at Minority Issues Research Institute, headquartered in Bratislava. Thank you for joining our MIRI seminar on current affairs, which will feature a conversation on the rising insurgencies in West Africa, their reasons, and the consequences of the insurgents' threat to peace and security with our senior research associate, Dr. Nnaoma Hyacinth Iwu. Dr. Iwu is a lecturer at Adekunle, Ajasin University in Nigeria. He was one of the core members of our previous Bari Global Network initiative that last year institutionalized into the MIRI. Dr. Iwu will provide a nuanced narrative of the vulnerability of Nigeria's border communities in the counterinsurgency war in Nigeria today. The seminar will be moderated by Dr. Angela Gapa, an associate professor of international affairs at California State University. She's an established scholar and expert in African security, among other areas. In the previous MIRI seminar, we had the honor to hear her presentation on developments in Niger. And we are again very honored to have her here today with us in the capacity of moderator. To both, once again, thank you for your time and willingness to take part in MIRI seminar. I'm looking forward to presentation and the following discussion. I'm now handing the floor to Dr. Angela Gapa to introduce in detail Dr. Iwu. Thank you.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, and hello, everyone. My name is Angela Gapa. I'm joining you from Northern California, and it's my great pleasure to be moderating this discussion on the vulnerability of Nigeria's border communities in the context of counterinsurgency in Nigeria. Our speaker today is Dr. Nnaoma Hyacinth Iwu. Dr. Iwu is a senior research associate at MIRI. His research focuses on the throes of minorities in a manufactured majoritarian electoral democracy in Nigeria. His broader research interests include conflict resolution, research methodology in political science, civil society and participation, comparative political analysis, political party and governance, civil military relations, good governance issues, strategic issues, and broader international relations issues. He's a lecturer in comparative politics, civil society, conflict resolution, and strategic studies department of political science at Adekunle Ajasin University in Nigeria. So without further ado, I would like to ask Dr. Iwu to present his analysis on the topic. And after that, I will ask a few questions and also leave time for the audience to ask their questions. So you can prepare those as you listen along. Dr. Iwu, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here and to associate with MIRI. So my topic is the vulnerability of Nigerian border communities in the context of counterinsurgency in Nigeria. Yeah, what I would likely draw to our mind is that this insurgency formally commenced in 2009 and up to today, the situation is still almost as it was. It's only that, it operates in form of, kind of guerrilla war. You hit and run. So I would actually start by quoting a statement from former Vice President of America, Dick Cheney, who asked a question to actually find out when this terrorism will be over. You understand? It's a pertinent question. Can this terrorism be over? But the event in Nigeria just on 26th of April this year shows that, the event is likely not to be over soon because a home military barrack was sacked. A home military barrack was sacked in Niger State. And so I'm going to present paper on the vulnerability of, border communities. And I would want us to take it historically because these communities have actually faced more problem than the urban area. So why do I say this? The build up to radicalization that occurred in these border communities has a historical content. First of all, if we take the narrative from the trans-Saharan trade that occurred far remote 7th, 8th, 11th century, the trans-Saharan, where the traders migrated that came from Middle East and then to the whole of Africa, North Africa, and then to West Africa, down to Nigeria on trade. This trans-Saharan trade was accompanied by Muslims, Islam. And the climax of it was in 1804 when there was, a jihad, what we call Ottoman Danfodio War, that actually wanted to instituted what you call pure Islam. So Islam has existed in these border communities. These border communities have received influx of traders and all this while. So, and these people have settled. So what makes this community vulnerable was that, the whole setup of people who are in that area have a mixture of tribes, people from different ethnic groups, and and largely many of them have this tendency that they want to have a pure Islam and a separate state. In fact, these communities have existed more of a state within state. So what came to be as Boko Haram, you understand, well, I want to trace it a bit backward in Nigeria to something like 2002 and 2002, when there was the first site of radicalization that took place in the northern Nigeria, where students who were in school had to withdraw from school, and those who actually have graduated tore their certificates. And some also who were working in the civil service had to resign, all in the belief that, contact with Western education was wrong. In fact, the meaning of Boko Haram is that, Western education is evil. So this has actually what informed that. So this case, the first attempt to dismantle that group made them to retreat into a place called Goza in Borno State, and which is a border community. So the paper actually tried to look at this phenomenon as it occurred, and then what we have today in these communities. Nigeria shares border with Niger, Chad, Cameroon, and the whole northeastern states, and even northwest. And then the situation is the same because you have too many tribes and ethnic groups that are numbering up to 113. So this paper tried to showcase the problem because these communities, border communities, served as a training ground, a launch pad, by Boko Haram. So first, let me say that the theoretical framework adopted for the study is primordial theory and state fragility theory. Why do I adopt primordial theory? Because these people that have existed there for a long time can claim originality to the owners of the place, even when some of them are coming from Chad, Niger, and Sudan, even Middle East. This is presently, we are talking about this present generation, but their forefathers migrated as early as 7th, 11th century in the form of trade and as traders. So the younger ones now claim originality. So Primordial now try to give sense of this because they try to create autonomy. So now, what do you do to that when they have constructed this identity that is it? So state fragility theory actually looked at the failure of Nigerian state to contain some of the misgivings that are already known. And then what's it is that these border communities, like my paper tried to show, are near the share border with deserts. In fact, an open, what we call ungoverned territory, open space, where you have, you can't talk about boundary. In fact, it's an illusion to talk about boundary in those northern areas, because some of them stretches up to 2,000 kilometers, and even 2 million on a stretch, 2 million kilometers on a stretch. If you want to take it, stretching, covering about 5 countries and all what have you. So the paper tried to look at this issue of constructivism and this and how that reinforces it. And the question of citizenship now become a problem in these border communities. So if you look at border, there are 3 theoretical areas that are actually looked at. I think Wits and Potter try to use what you call the realism, the rationalism, and the revolutionary. The realism are actually, based on their school, they have, phobia for international interaction or agreement, for which Nigerian border communities was actually based on. That is, you talk about ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, that try to establish a protocol that will enable citizens of West Africa to move across boundaries and establish business wherever they want. The realist school would not subscribe to that, because states' interest and state survival and protection is primary to them. Then that is, according to that. The realists, the rationalists actually are those who respect international agreements like ECOWAS signed with other African countries, But the problem with this rationalist theory, if you want to use it to explain this, is that they don't have the capacity to check what is going on there. So now the revolutionary theories are the one that best explains the phenomena going on in West African borders, on Nigerian borders. That is where people originally have developed a mindset of helping each other, undermining whatever the state provides. So when you talk about boundary, you are talking about strengthening to them. And then, so the colonial incursion that balkanized or partitioned Africa is just an illusion. You see, they don't think that ever makes any meaning, because they have developed a feeling that they have to help one another, and they are the same, at least having built themselves on common ideology of religion and all that. So these communities now that share in this border now faces a big problem, because the terrorists that attacked Nigeria have used that place as a safe haven. And this started long time ago. You see, though the scholars have identified it, so many scholars in Nigeria, like Akinteriwa and the rest of them, but the question of looking at how this historical context have actually given rise to this is what is not actually given adequate attention, because they can't just understand why Boko Haram will attack on the city and then retreat to the border communities only to find a sympathetic cohort, a cohort that is highly sympathetic. That means they have been there over a time and all that. So I gathered my information data for this using my postgraduate student, a doctoral student from the area, who actually, if I have a picture of him in desert and all other areas. In fact, if you look at border between Nigeria and Niger, border between Nigeria and Cameroon, border between Nigeria and Chad, you cannot, you can succinctly be referred as a borderless community. That's why the findings I have here showed that there are more than 10,000 entry points. And even the immigration officers acknowledge that we have recognized 1,400 border entry points. This is official recognition. But the statistics shows, research shows that you have more than 10,000 points that are not recognized. So now, taking the vulnerability of these border communities, how they came in contact. I have mentioned Trans-Saharan. Then these communities went the Sahel, some states in the Sahel Africa like Niger, Chad, and Mali suffered droughts, in 1973. It pushed many of the citizens down to these border communities. That was where they stayed. And this issue of drought has been a consistent issue in this North Africa and even West African area. So they find a place they can have a means. So the same thing that makes the Fulanis, the cattle headers, move across countries in West Africa is the same thing that propels the individuals looking for a habitation. So that was one of the points that actually caused a problem where these people have to move down and all that. So like I said, the studies on border communities actually previously have focused on those issues that have to do with arms, narcotics, crime, border markets, transhuman patriotism, and all that. But how this actually impacts on the successes recorded by Boko Haram is not actually given attention. But now look at one part of it now. In 2013 and 14, the first attempt by Nigerian government was to declare state of emergency. And this state of emergency encapsulated under what they call Operation Response Order, Operation ORO, okay? That was meant to flush the Boko Haram out of the city. Can you imagine? You flush the Boko Haram out of the city to where? To rural communities, to the border communities, to Sambisa forests. That these are the border communities. You flush them out. Then what of the capacity of that border communities? That is, if Boko Haram is flushed back to the border communities, it means that is a place they have a sympathetic cohorts and all that. Though there are areas where they were resisted as the paper shows, in Biu, Mandera area, a place called Biu and others, in that they were resisted. People have to form local vigilantes. So now for Nigerian states to also form what we call civilian JTF, the reason for it was because they believe that these local hunters are the ones that have an idea of the local terrain. So we can't be talking about local terrain except when you are talking about far remote areas and all that. So that is the thing. So these border communities that solve this problem is the main focus of this paper. And these border communities share borders with countries in Africa that have problems. One of them, which is known globally, is Chad. Chad that is engrossed with political crisis, Niger, Mali, even Somalia, because since these African territories, West African territories, is actually unmanned and is desert, is a freelance movement that you have, then that means the whole thing retreats. So one event that looks at that, even from Somalia, they come to Central Africa, moving into Cameroon, and then fluxing into Nigeria. So this one of the issues that gave signal that border communities have remained vulnerable in the counterinsurgency. Another point also that I noted in my paper was that, and that was also acknowledged by the former president, President Buhari, that the militants who fought in the Libyan war, 8 months Libyan war, were the ones causing the problem or killing people in Nigeria. Then how did they get into Nigeria? It is through migration through these border communities. And, before Gaddafi had made an open statement that was not acknowledged within the military circle, the security circle, that Nigeria should be divided into two, the Christian South and the Muslim not. Okay? Then this is the thing. So when this statement was made, they took it for granted and merely made a jest of his comment, but they didn't follow up that of to knowing how he was trying to do this. So while the war was going on, Muammar Gaddafi had two problems. One, he wanted to get those he called the militias who were fighting him. He wanted to defeat them. Second was to attack states that he feels that are, allies of the West. And then, so while the war was going on, Nigeria was receiving an influx of these people. And even after the war in Libya, now the interim government that emerged, as the site shows, has no control of the territory, not even ammunition. And ammunitions are sold on the streets. And all these things ends up in Nigeria. So that is the thing. So these things ends up, the border communities become the first point. Also in Cameroon, there was an interception of armory coming all the way from Somalia that was intercepted, entering Nigerian border through Cameroon and all that. So the question now is that these border communities that have remained vulnerable are actually not focused strategically with the intention to deal with what facilitates it, either the ungoverned territory, a policy measure towards that, or to get a technological device security measures so as to do this. So the question of balkanization and giving Nigeria a particular territory, Niger a particular territory, in fact, is an illusion. There is a statement that, if I can read it, is from Mohammed Bakindo Aliyu Mustafa. That is the Lamido of Adamawa Emirate in Nigeria state. And quote, he said, "My kingdom translates three countries. My kingdom translates three countries, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Niger Republic. Until today, the traditional rulers in those countries have come to me. They write letters and I reply them. Even recently, the last December, I went to Cameroon. The whole of northern Cameroon is my kingdom. Africa was shared during the Berlin Conference, in which French and German took that part of Africa, and the British took this part." This is quoted in a Tell magazine of 2014. So the thing you talk about boundary and these communities is just, it's better captured by that revolutionary theories that says that these people actually have been, and will ever form that thought. Then the former governor of Sokoto State, Aminu Tambuwal, who also said that some people wake up, walk in his Sokoto State and go to Niger to sleep because it's just about 2 kilometers and all that. So this situation now, looking at this, the vulnerability of this border community, this study had some recommendations which I called securitization of the northeastern border community, securitization. So securitization is a concept that actually emanated during the Cold War, when actually liberal thoughts that are expressed in form of speech was seen as an essential threat in the Eastern Europe. You understand? Because they did not want to hear anything liberal thoughts. So there was a high level of scrutiny by conversation, speech act, anything that could warrant that. And then, so the kind of vulnerability of these northeastern communities requires a high level of securitization. Because what do I mean? Because the only way to actually control that area is for government to define the security measure. As long as the threats coming there, if there is allowed to continue, is actually going to, overrun the country one day, like the Boko Haram, the insurgents want to create a caliphate state. In fact, as at 2014, they had effective control of 21 local governments. And it was in 2015 that the issue of recovering, reclaiming of those local governments came when Buhari made a change. And that partly succeeded because he used an indigenous of the area, Brutaye, as a chief of army staff, but he cannot continue. He has left. So right now, where are they still operating? That means they are building up. It's always an illusion to think that you can defeat Boko Haram. Like Chini asked, when will it end? You understand? Any moment they are not acting. I mean, terrorists, any moment they are not acting, it's a low period in which they could be planning. So the securitization, like, is a strategy that actually was used in some countries. In Canada, it was used when the Muslim community there came under suspect, and it was introduced because they have to, infringe upon their fundamental human rights, looking at issues, because leaving them will cause annihilation of a state, a fall in a state. There's nothing wrong in also introducing a very strict measure. Securitization was also used. That was what also Trump used to when he ordered for the killing of the Iranian military commander that was always pulling the troops against this in the American interest. So securitization, when an issue is posing existential threat, the elites of the state have the right to define it within that context. So the paper captures, things that actually, shows that the border communities in the West African countries requires, to be securitized, okay? Because ECOWAS, in its measure, have no capacity, and then the Boko Haram insurgents, their mind is to establish, a caliphate state. For example, in Mubi local government, in 2014, a place that was captured, was renamed Mandela Islam. Even in Yobe, the youth turned themselves and called themselves Yobe Talibans. So they borrow names that are already, they borrow names that shows that these are, people that are radicalized. So one illusion about those scholars who are focusing on terrorism in Africa is to always bring in the issue of, poverty. Of course, in the management of these things, we have the kinetic measure and non-kinetic measures. Okay, the kinetic measures takes on military, but the non-kinetic measure takes on empowerment, provision of all these things. But if you look at the history, the non-kinetic measures that were applied, in fact, it could not resolve the problem. Rather, whatever you do is like, that's why even some of the political elites there have to take on that opportunity to catch on government fund. In fact, one important issue that tells you about the issue of poverty narrative that is overshadowing the discourse on Boko Haram, overlooking all this issue of ungoverned territories and the build-up that has been there over a time, which to me cannot actually be explained using economic variables like it has always been, is that the governor, when in 2009, Al-Mahdi Sharif actually replied to the critics who blamed him for not providing job to these Boko Harams. You know what he said? He said, how can I provide job to people that have no education? That less than 5% of these people have no education. So the question now, and also this Yusuf, who actually started this Boko Haram issue, had a farmland of up to 80 kilometers and was paying these people. You understand? In the same Goza we are talking about, this border community, 80 kilometers. So one, we have to look at this issue of communities there. That is why I strongly recommend that the securitization should be used as a strategy to actually move in. And this securitization, if it requires now that everything West Africa can spend is to get the whole of the vast territory that exists extending to Middle East. You walk from Nigeria to Niger to Libya to Algeria to it's an open space. So if they can spend money getting technology, you understand, and then that is what is needed, because to think of then, meanwhile, the issue of de-radicalization continues, of course, but the minds build up on what we call global Ummah is a big problem.
So it looks like, if I understood what he's saying that you know, primordial associations and solidarities are apparently stronger than these modern state structures, right? And that presents a vulnerability for Nigeria. And so,
okay, if you can hear me, I have I've tried to show that the communities, the border communities in the northeastern zone have serious problems, and in the northeastern states, we have that shares border with so many countries in West Africa, that we have groups that are sympathetic to Boko Haram, and the issue of poverty narrative cannot explain the problem there. And then we have those that are also antagonistic. So, but the only way that that problem can be dealt with is securitization, you know, where the states will have to step in more. And even if it continues on non-kinetic measures, more kinetic measure is needed, especially in the area of securitization, which require strong surveillance, you know, because they build up to the philosophy that that is challenging the Western civilization has been on for a long time. So that problem, negating the Huntington's view of two clash, you know, the clash of civilization. So is to me, it's a misnomer. They simply think whatever that happened in Africa is poverty, is poverty. No, there's poverty everywhere. But you have to look at this context of global, you know, challenge, this hegemonic struggle of global control. Africa, from the Middle East conception, is like a backyard territory that should be owned by them. And then everything done is to destabilize it. And these border communities is actually, there is a statement coming from one of those who are also the extremists, who believe that the world is made up of two people. One is the Islamic people, and the other one is the Jewish people. And therefore, this is the two communities that inhabit the earth. So everything done is to ensure that the world is divided along that way. And Africa becomes vulnerable, mostly West Africa, becomes vulnerable to this philosophy, whereby, and there was a direct post that except by this group of people, especially Gaddafi, and that except these Africans are ruled by Muslims, any other person that rule would never have it easy. In fact, this is a direct statement that came, you know, from Gaddafi and those who champion the global divide between Christians and this. So all this is empties in you know, the border communities where that operates more of a state within state. So this is my view, and if I can hear your voice, I will take a question. Thank you so much.
All right, so I will summarize the few notes that I've written. So Dr. Iwu gave a broad overview of the vulnerabilities of border communities in northern Nigeria and its bordering countries, Niger, Chad, Cameroon, and he mainly gave a historical analysis beginning in 2009, but he went even further than that to the Trans-Sahara trade, which was accompanied by Islam, which brought these border communities together. This climaxed in 1804, where pure Islam existed in these border communities, and due to the I don't know what he referred to as the jihadist. I forgot the word that he used. But the mixture of tribes that were in this region wanted a brand of pure Islam, which is one of the galvanizing identities within these regional areas. In 2002, you have the first set of radicalized violence within the region. And this is where you now see Boko Haram evolving into an organization that mainly focused on viewing Western education as sacrilegious and mainly attacking school institutions. And border communities became the training grounds as well as the launching pads for recruitment into the broader Boko Haram. His theoretical framework that he utilizes is one of primordialism, so a primordial framework, mainly focusing on kith and kin identities that have galvanized over time within the region. So these could be both ethnic, as well as religious, and also to a large part geographic. And then he also utilizes a straight fragility framework, mainly focusing on the inability of the state due to corruption and due to a lack of state capacity in addressing the terrorist and the insurgency in the region. So the border communities become a safe haven for the terrorist organization in that, with the pushback that the government has been putting in place to flesh out Boko Haram from urban areas, the border communities become the safe haven for the terrorist groups and the insurgencies to operate from. And this is facilitated by the porous borders, the ungoverned environment. He did mention over 10,000 unmanned entry points. Also, the issue of a drug trade makes this case more complicated. In terms of the counterinsurgency from the Nigerian government in 2013 and 2014, a state of emergency operation response order was meant to address the Boko Haram insurgency by the government. And the last one of my notes, I was mainly focused on some of the recommendations that Dr. Iwu provided, which is to establish a securitization analytical framework for addressing the terrorist threat in northern Nigeria. So utilizing this securitization approach, mainly to focus on increasing state capacity, increasing military capacity of the Nigerian government as well as neighboring governments to provide more military capabilities and military resources, particularly focusing on the ungoverned spaces, considering the vastness of the territory. So currently, those are the notes that I had broadly written. So if anyone else wants to add any things that I may have left out.
I think you covered it very well.
Okay, thanks. Oh, thank you.
Should I raise my hand?
Would you like to start? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry that you can't hear us, Dr. Iwu, but thanks for the enlightening us about a different and giving us a different perspective on Boko Haram. I work also on Boko Haram. I think we're supposed to do this, but I was saying that there might be a lot of overlap. And that was the only reason. And yeah, I'm glad that you picked on the state fragility. My work is mostly based on that, but from capacity angle. And also, is it very interesting that you brought out the primordial alliances, which is, anyway, I'm from Nigeria, in case, you know. Yes, I think you are right in terms of the primordial alliances that exist in Nigeria and with his neighboring. But the question is it always on the negative side? Because when we look at that, generally, apart from Boko Haram, there has been a lot of other ways that alliances are actually benefiting different countries. So that one thing I will say is one of my comments is this: could you give us more? Make your argument in terms of how you present the primordial alliances, what you call the primordial alliances, in a negative way. But could you also explain that it's not always like that, because that will give it kind of a balance? Because one could also say that in every other country, there is that alliances that exist, but it's not usually come. I know this is a challenge to Westphalian states, which is, of course, specifically and peculiar problematic to African countries. That's one point. And but the fact that, yes, there are some issues, there's a lot of issues in terms of the alliances that exist because of ethnicity, because if you go to the northern part, the dominant ethnic group in the northern part of the country are also found in these different countries. And that's my general comment. I don't want to take other people's time, but also one of the major questions I want to ask is this. You did suggest, you made mention a lot about comment made by Gaddafi, and which has a lot of implications. And from my understanding is, it seems as if you're saying that Gaddafi has a contribution, but in as much as Gaddafi made those comments, I can't see the connection, either correlation or causation of his comments. So what is going on in Nigeria? I do understand there's a movement of equipment and weapons from the fall of Libya that created more access to weapons in the region, and due to the porous border, there's easy flow of weapons. But the comment of Gaddafi, which you mentioned a few times, I'm not sure how that is related to what is happening in that West Africa, and how that connects to the your argument and your suggestion of the way we do it. So I hope, in fact, I hope that you have a better way of framing it, and implying, instead of implying that Gaddafi has a lot to do with what is going on in West Africa, or especially among the Boko Haram. And also bear in mind that Boko Haram also, Gaddafi died in 2011. So I'm not sure where the relevance is. I think I'll stop here. Sorry, I've said too much already.
All right, so some of the comments that I had mainly focused on were, he had this view that economic marginalization and economic reasons are not as pertinent, but I wanted to challenge that on the basis of a lot of border communities feel on the periphery of larger state dynamics. So in essence, that economic marginalization becomes part and parcel of why recruitment into these extremist insurgencies become a particularly attractive thing for them, because this is the way that they provide security for the communities by having a group that is in support of them. So I just wanted to, to sort of like unpack this view of the primordial argument solely on an identity aspect, such as, for example, religion or ethnicity, versus in terms of economic marginalization. Okay. And then I also wanted to find out how the securitization framework would play out with the other regional countries, the bordering countries such as Niger and Chad that he has mentioned. Would there need to be a harmonization of the securitization framework? Because currently it's more of a state-centric, state-led framework of addressing insurgencies. So how that would play out in cooperation with other countries which are affected.
If I may, I also may kind of provide a comment. I think that it was a kind of interesting presentation. However, I also think, that should perhaps maybe help also to think in terms of what is globally happening. And for some time now, especially in the areas of the world that are mostly affected by the climate change, there is a literature on retribalization. So it's not only happening in West Africa, but in Central America, in parts of Europe, in Asia, people basically falling back on the traditional, solidarities to deal with the crisis. So I also, like Dr. Gapa, I think that we cannot dismiss the economic challenges from the whole problem. David Lightin have also written a book about how states' capacity definitely impact this type of, and he measured how state capacity definitely impact this type of outcomes. So I think that perhaps it may be helpful to understand that global, how would you say, retribalization, ongoing global retribalization, perhaps in the context of the West African region, but in a broader global context, and see whether there are some similarities with other places, and in that way maybe come up with more appropriate policy.
So do I take, I want to take a question, a comment from Dr. Patricia, that try to establish a disconnect between the comment made by Muammar Gaddafi and the recent development. Anyway, there is a serious connection. The one is that, like I quoted Huntington, Clash of Civilization and the remaking of the New World Order, that try to show this is a global struggle that started over the years. So when such comment was made, and then the Nigerian angle took it for granted. But, I'm quoting a statement that is on Nigerian newspaper, 2018, and that was after 8 years Gaddafi was killed. And this statement came from Nigerian president. You can Google, I'll give the site. President Muhammad Buhari of Nigeria openly blamed the insecurity in the north on the militias who fought on the side of Muammar Gaddafi, killed 8 years ago. This was a statement he made openly, 2018. You understand? So the question is this: when you talk about radicalization, it's a process. And when it's done, it stays on. You understand? So that statement made by Gaddafi then, and while the war was going on, that was when Nigeria witnessed a high level of, attack, because Gaddafi saw Nigeria as one of those allies of the West. Like if he had the opportunity, he could perhaps have matched NATO. You understand? Who assisted in making sure that his regime is brought down. So the only response he has was this. Why that? And then after the war, the ammunition, the proliferation of arms and everything, the interim government that took over had no control of the armories. And even the whole states was just like divided among militia groups who trade in arms and in other illegal dealings. So that is a strong connection. And while they move to Niger, the end point is Nigeria that is currently facing the insurgency war. So that statement coming from him is not, what Nigeria can take for granted, knowing for sure that ab initio, Gaddafi has been on the front of thinking that the Western idea, Western values are eroded in Africa. That has been the main confrontation between him and the West. Africa is his territory. Even That was why he was also rejected from being the head of African Union, even though he orchestrated the formation of AU, African Union, you understand. But when he wanted to lead, and then other African leaders were conscious that if Gaddafi is allowed to do that, and that could mean that he's going to come more confrontational against the West, which was not in their own interest. That is the thing. So that is, there's a strong connection. And what we are still having today, like my paper showed here, is that these foreign terrorist fighters, in fact, research shows that outside Somalia, Jordan is another country that is the country that has that contribute to foreign terrorist fighters. All these people come. Even the paper shows that this Yemen that is at the bottom, they call it as that is Yemen, the Ogande River, Ogande River, that Gulf of Ogande that divides Yemen and Somalia. That's people cross, and then most of the terrorist groups that in Yemen cross to Somalia, and these Somali fighters are the ones. My paper showed a proper training. It grants where they train these terrorists in the deserts, and these deserts are near the border communities. So all these things is shown that activities going on in these other African countries like Chad, and Mali, and all these things, Nigeria received the consequences. So the border communities stands out at that. Then, going by the second question that tried to, you mentioned the state fragility factor. Yes, I use it as a theory because to show that, yes, even the inability to mine the ungoverned territory is as a result of that, okay? But one thing is that those who always use state fragility have always focused on economic factors. If you have instances like those when in 2000 and 2002, when this issue of radicalization started, those who were working that resigned, those who were in school that dropped out of school, those who had certificate that tore it, that choose to, then are you talking about poverty? The Muhammad Yusuf, who was paying these youths, where did he get the money? And he was already controlling a farm of 80 kilometers. So poverty, fine. But, the question now is that this long war, 2009 to date, you understand that the issue of Boko Haram has been established. Then you begin to say, is that a factor? That singular variable that is overhyped is a major problem why, the issue that has to do with these ungoverned territories and the more stricter measures that require securitization, that demand securitization, are not deployed. Because you look at poverty and the rest of them. If you see the account I have here of how, young people, yield themselves to be used as suicide bombers. You understand? So, okay, look at the case of Farouk, Lawal, who agreed to use himself as a suicide bomber in the 2009 December American airline. His father was a regional first bank manager, and his school had the best schools, and even wanted to get to the best schools. So the issue about the poverty narrative, I did not rule it out, but we have to look at this struggle in the global context. So many factors are contributing to why our border communities are vulnerable. Like the man mentioned, the climate change that is pushing people from this Sahel area. It's a desert area, always experiencing drought. And Nigeria seems to have a good environment where you have consistent rain and all that, as different, even though we have desert and all those things. So these are factors that also contribute. The Fulani headers, the headers that walk all the way from Guinea, coming to Nigeria and even entering southern Nigeria, is as a result of climate change and also the fact that they believe that every part of Nigeria is theirs. So the question now is, when you look at the activities of Boko Haram, you definitely conclude that this is driven by this idea of clash of civilization that want to believe that Africa is a territory that should be owned by the Islam. You understand? And then maybe, and any other state that is resisting that in Africa is seen as, you know, going contrary to the views of those extremists. So that is the point that I'm trying to make. And then the border communities where you have all these extremists finding, you know, sympathetic cohorts should be focused. So I recommended securitization because it is a strategy that will give the states, if they are honest in fighting it, the opportunity to define any issue in security terms, not just military. So they can go on to identify those people. Though one of the critiques against securitization is that some politicians can use it against their opponents. That is one thing. They can use it against their opponents. But, you know, when you want to fight a situation, if Nigeria, the question now is that if Nigerian military or Nigerian government feel that they are honest and they want to fight Boko Haram, you understand, then they have to use it, okay? Because the question is that if you leave Boko Haram, it poses what you call existential threats. Like, why they going to attack military barracks? That is to put Nigeria, to displace Nigeria. The Metele we are talking about that got attacked, Metele barrack that got attacked, is even a town near the border communities. Military barrack was sacked completely, Metele. You understand? So these things are showing where you, to the extent of coming down to Abuja to bomb the police headquarters. So all these things is to displace Nigeria. And where are they coming from? They come from these border communities. You understand? So this is a paper that I think if one had opportunity, that I asked Svetluša if we can have where we can be publishing our papers, you know, when it's presented, so that our colleagues can also, after critique and all these things, we can look at it. Then you can see some of those issues. So the question I have made today is that the issue of border communities must be taken as important as what poses threat to human existence. And we want to, and I also cited Yusuf, who was the governor of Borno State when this thing started, who defended those who accused him of not caring for the indigenes, telling them that the people we are talking about have no education. If they refuse education, how could they be employed under Nigerian that run a capitalist system, you know, a modern system that is built on Western education? The agriculture that they are in control of, is a big money. It's a big money. There is a budget for agriculture. There is what you call FADEMA, that is aimed at farmers. In fact, up to today, the food scarcity we have in Nigeria now and the high cost of living is because of the Boko Haram attack, meaning that they are the ones that were supplying food to the south. So if they supply the meat, the yam, and everything we eat, that means they are rich. And that agriculture is a ministry in Nigeria that has a very large chunk of budget. So they are working. They are working. So this narrow definition of being employed, that is taking government, working in government as employment, is a problem. I watch scholars who make this comment, and that's why they overemphasize the issue of this thing, that a poverty issue. Fine. You don't, even in the urban area and other parts of Nigeria, there are people who are poor. Okay, now the reason is, why do they have this claim? Because actually ISIS started in a city in I think in Iran that can be said to be where you have relatively poor people. You understand? So then fine, it's a thing that you can, but there are good ones. I cited in this work of those who are in government that were fingered for sponsoring Boko Haram. There is organization, this Hezbollah organization in Nigeria that was providing aid to all these fundings, to all these people and all that. So those big men in government who were actually, many 6 was identified, and government refused to announce them, announce their names, and they get that. So you don't talk about issue of poverty as if the poverty is only in the north. It's not in the north alone. And what they are doing, I'm trying to tell you, what we have to do is this. My argument is that we should try to isolate these variables and know which one can be independent variable and which one that is dependent. Okay? So which one, and I think there is always a transformation from independent variable to dependent variable, from dependent variable to independent variable. You understand? So if you go on and this in now, the weapons wielded by Boko Haram from 2009 shows that it's not a poor man war. Armored personnel carriers, jeep, all kinds of lessons. Okay, so what is that now? So the question now is that if you extend the narrative to what is going on in the Middle East, do you also say it's poverty? If you go by the analysis of ISIS and the Qaeda and say this is also poverty. So we have to look at it from the ideological struggle, clash of civilization. There's an attempt to say that Africa is theirs. So we only find a place. The place we call the border communities was recognized by the colonial masters as an infested crime area. As an infested crime area. So it has been on. So it's not just a this, it has been on. It's recognized as an infested crime area. And these are all that I have here. Okay? So it's not just today that people are thinking it's the issue of poverty. So it's a place where, that has been neglected. That's my argument. Has been neglected, not because they are poor, you understand, but for the security reason, the ungoverned territories. So if Africa can spend the whole money and get the technology to securitize the place, and also with the intention to identify those people who come in there, using that place as a training ground. My research, I find out in one of the confession made by a Boko Haram person that was arrested to a journalist, a foreign journalist. He said in the field there, you see people from Somalia, from Middle East, from Yemen and all that. You okay? The Middle East, who are training, different part of the world, who are there training. And that is the question now. So where are they coming from? Do they come through the air? No, they came through land, through forests. Through forests. Like I said, Yemen's position at the bottom of the Arabian Peninsula. That is what I have here. Darwin, it's an article, makes it closer to the Horn of Africa, Somalia, than most of the Middle East, Yemen. Okay, this provides opportunity for terrorists from Yemen to cross to Somalia and vice versa, as was seen in the case where even some terrorists from Somalia went to Yemen. You understand? These are things.
Maybe we can open the questions. We can open the floor for more questions. Can we have a little more dynamic conversation, right?
Do we still have time? I was under the impression that we ended 6:15.
Yeah, we should finish slowly. I have one comment and also question, because Dr. Gapa was saying that how she had summarized that Dr. Ibu is using securitization of terrorism as an analytical approach, but I had impression he wants to use this approach. So I don't know if I'm right, that you want to use this approach towards the communities, because you all the time you were repeating that these border communities are safe havens for terrorists. And in my work, I also use securitization as an analytical framework, but this approach means that you label something as existential threat to justify the measures that go beyond normal act of taking matters, So I am just wondering if you want to, if you want to use this approach, you actually, by what you are saying, you are securitizing these communities, and it seems that you are taking essentialistic approach towards these communities. You take them as a homogeneous group, you know, and working with identities, you use primordialism, but we know I'm for example constructivist, and I use constructivism, and we know that no community is homogeneous, it's heterogeneous. You just cannot say that everybody are safe haven for terrorists, or you know that they are more open to radicalization. So I'm just wondering how you approach this methodological issue in your work. If you could explain, and maybe then we can wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you so much. I tried to mention that you know, two communities, two variables emerge in my study. That is the sympathetic and antagonistic group. You know, and then we have in the group that actually I regard as the antagonistic group. I mentioned it, about 3 groups called the Biu in the north, especially Adamawa State, you know, where the communities themselves resisted Boko Haram, and the reason they had never allowed external people trying to usurp authority on them. Biu is one of them, and communities in Gombe, you understand, that were able to resist Boko Haram. So when I talk about the issue of securitization, one is that, you see, when an issue poses an essential threat, the state leaders who are honest have become the sole definitor of what is right and what is wrong. Because if the issue of human rights that people claim because of one person, then you leave the criminals to be taking advantage of that. This issue of what civil society is championing every time, women, children, and all that. But from the findings here, there are more children, about 8,000 more children are even reported by United Nations that are recruited. You understand? So when, like in a Boko Haram war that this research shows now, it's like a kind of a war that is like, you don't have a soldier, you can't define them, you can't identify. There are people that their identities are not known. You can't see them by clothes, but they have some dangerous things less. So when you use securitization will enable you to do more inward search. So it's not a question of why do you have to talk to me? Do you see me carrying anything? So, because if you fail to do that, the same person that is very clean today walking on the street, at another time is a terrorist, is a suicide bomber. So it's through securitization that looks beyond military to look at even speech acts, mode of conversation, even that can also try to censor religious organizations. You understand? Then, though the international community may be complaining, the civil society, international civil organization will be talking about infringement. That's why this work, at the end, I have to draw from realist perspective that would always want to ensure state survival. You understand? If Nigeria ensures state survival and they would not want to yield to a caliphate state, they can come out with these measures. So it's not to say that you can find a place where you have total sympathetic group, but they feel that are antagonistic, are afraid because they will be killed. And that is why you see Boko Haram attacking this. That's why I talk about vulnerability. They are attacking individuals in these border communities who have no power. You understand? So securitization, you can use it as an analytical framework, but it's also a strategy. I cited instance of in Canada, where a particular Muslim community was securitized because they become a suspect community. He cited Ahmed. You understand? And the securitization enables government to think of even beyond their country. That was what made Trump to order for the killing of that Iranian military leader, because his actions there was the one triggering hatred, wherever American interest is, he bombs, he orders for the killing and all that. So
yeah,
that
you can slowly wrap up. I just want to say that you know I don't think it's right to use securitization for justifying human rights infringements of any person or a group. So, but we can continue this conversation further after this mini seminar. So please summarize your thoughts and yeah.
okay.
And thank you so much for your presentation.
Okay. Very good. So this paper actually looked at Nigerian border communities and tried to highlight that movement into Nigerian border communities have taken a long time, and on which the people there developed a feeling of oneness. In fact, in these border communities, you have multiple ethnic groups with different languages, but they are united under one thing, either as Christians or Muslims, but predominantly they are Islamic. And in fact, what led to jihad war, I mean the jihad war known as Ottoman Danfodio War in 1802 or 1804, was an attempt to introduce what you call pure Muslim. Then the Kanuris in Nigeria, then the Kanuris then that are different from this Sokoto Caliphate, resisted them, but they are also Muslim. The Kanuris are Muslims. Then this other person, the Ottoman Danfodio that wanted a pure Islam, that is also a Muslim, but at the end of the day, one discovers that it was actually born out of this idea of this hegemonic, or what they call global Ummah, spreading of Islam and all that. What rolled them back was actually the colonial state, colonial citizen that came and stopped, and then introduced indirect rule system, stopped their spread. If not, they would have overrun the entire Nigeria and some other inhibiting factors. So these border communities remain vulnerable. So what is known now is that, and then people are catching on easy variable. That is what they call poverty narrative. Poverty narrative, as if there are no poor people in all parts of the world. And the reason they quickly cite is 3 states in Syria. You know, one is called Ezo, Hazard, and Iraq, where the ISIS started. So wherever anything is going on and they see people that are poor, they attribute it to poverty. And this is a misconception. I've argued that you can't begin to narrow employment to when it is in government. The farmers there are richer. They supply the meat, they supply the food, and there is a direct budget to them. And the program called even from World Bank. So the Boko Haram leaders are all rich. So then the question is that the radicalization is based on what we call the global struggle for against Western civilization.
Excuse me, Dr. Iwu, it looks like a lot of people have other commitments. So if we can end here and continue the conversation offline. But thank you so much for your comments. I think it goes without saying that Nigeria is very representative, and the case that you've given, you've also made me think a lot about how generalizable your argument is to other parts of the world. You gave a really good example of why in the Middle East, people don't really talk about economic marginalization. They tend to focus mainly on sub-Saharan Africa. And also the West Africa is sort of like the model of African security when we look at ECOWAS, when we look at the hegemonic presence of the Nigerian military in West Africa. So it's definitely an area where a lot of research is going to be generalizable to the rest of the continent. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today and sharing in this conversation on Nigeria. And please spread the word of this MIRI platform to your cohorts. And I look forward to the next meeting. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gapa. Amazing.
So much.